Then my parents went all in and were wildly supportive. And when I share that to people, like, I actually greatly appreciate the slight pressure my parents put on me to make the pursuit valid. They were like, are you just mucking about? Is this just like prolonging something? Are you really doing this? It made me like pull up my bootstraps and buckle down and really make sure I did it.
Welcome to The Other 3 Years, a show for anyone who has an Olympic-sized dream they want to turn into a reality. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 3 Years podcast. My name is Kristi Wagner, and this week I have retired national team rower and current high performance coach with the Craftsbury Green Racing Project, Steve Whelpley. Steve had a 19-year competitive rowing career, which was highlighted by 3 national teams. He was a part of the Craftsbury Green Racing Project himself as an athlete. And then after retiring from the sport, he went on to coach both at his alma mater, Colby, and then eventually back to Craftsbury as the head coach of the rowing team. Craftsbury Outdoor Center is an awesome place. I recommend everyone check it out. It's run by Dick and Judy Dreisegecker, and it's a whole community for sports, summer and winter, and they have 4 elite teams: rowing, Nordic skiing, biathlon, and running. So it's a really awesome place. And Steve and I talked about how he got into rowing, what led him to continue rowing after college and his elite career. And we also talked about why and how he decided to coach after his own rowing career. So I really enjoyed speaking with him and feel like we had a lot of parallel experiences throughout our rowing lives. So it was kind of fun to get to share some of those stories with one another. And I just really appreciate him coming on and sharing so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the conversation. But before we get into that, here's an update on what is currently going on with my training. So I'm in Princeton, New Jersey. I just got here. Sophia and I drove from Sarasota, Florida to Princeton. It took us 2 days, but we did it. And actually, the drive really was not bad at all. It was pretty smooth sailing. We got in Saturday evening, so nice to just have Sunday to kind of relax and unwind, go grocery shopping, get everything all set up before the start of another training week. I went for a bike ride with my friend Michelle today, which was really fun. We just did a nice coffee ride, and it was nice to kind of stretch out, get the cobwebs out from sitting in a car for 2 days. But pretty excited to get back to training tomorrow. It now feels like it's been forever since I've been in a boat, even though it was just a few days ago. I'm pretty excited about that, and to be around so many people on the team again. Like, a lot of people are going to be training in Princeton the next month, which is really fun and exciting that we just get a new training cycle, new training block. We got to watch World Cup 1 happening in Varese, Italy today. Pretty jealous of those racing, pretty excited to be getting into a little bit more race intensity ourselves. And before we know it, we'll be racing. So excited to be in a new place, start a new block tomorrow, and have some new faces around. I bought some cookies from Whole Foods. They're very good. I'm excited to have one. So now it is time for my conversation with the head coach of the Green Racing Project, Steve Whelpley. All right, recording. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I feel like I can ask you questions I've always wanted to ask you, but now we're on a public forum.
Why didn't you ask me when we weren't on a public forum?
I don't know. I'm just so intrigued by people like you that just go right from training to coaching, and now you're just so in the same world, sort of, but just with a totally different vantage point. And I guess I don't know. I just have a lot of questions about that.
Okay.
But maybe we can just start with how you got into rowing, what your background was.
Yeah. So I don't think I was totally typical. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. MRC, Milwaukee Rowing Club, had a junior team prior to me and after me, but there was none for me when I was in high school. So prior to me, there was a national team that had Ursula and Chris Ahrens on it. Both were really talented rowers, and their dad and mother were critical pieces of having their junior program up and going. But when they moved on, the program kind of moved on from them. And I just had some high school buddies that one day we started talking about rowing, and one of the guys said his mom and dad belonged to Milwaukee Rowing Club and they row. And I was like, do you think they could get us out there sometime? And somehow this really hodgepodge ragtag situation started, and we had 2 8s for a week. Then we did morning practice and we had 1 8. Then people finished their college applications and we had 5 guys. That's sort of what it felt like. But it was a really cool debut in a rowing. Chris Aarons' father, Gary Aarons, helped out. Another great coach, Owen McVan. And then we had our main coach was Dan Ringsrad, who is my friend's father. He went to Dartmouth as a hockey goalie and started doing light rate rowing just as cross training to stay fit for the hockey season. And he was from Duluth, Minnesota. So he was a real quintessential coach in a lot of senses.
Yeah.
And it got us into the sport and had us all enjoying it. But I was the only one from all of our high school that rowed for 4 years in college, then rowed after college. I did that. I went to Colby College. I did apply to a couple D1 schools and I didn't get in. Colby was like the best school for me in a lot of senses. So I went there. I wasn't on their radar from rowing until I was there. It was a great program that provided more structure, but it was, still a D3 program where a lot of it had your success had to be your independent drive. I did a little bit of extra work and I saw, like, relative to peers, some improvement. But coming out of college, I was still far from a hot prospect for the handful of post-collegiate programs. For number of geeks, I graduated and was like 617. So needless to say, when I would email a club about post-collegiate rowing, they weren't like, yes, you should definitely do this. But Penny C sort of opened their arms to the possibility. We did the summer program and they said, if you do the summer program and we like the cut of your jib, then you could stay on, and they let us stay on. And I wound up rowing for 11 years after college total. So it was at Penny C, and then I started traveling to various clubs once I started sculling, sort of a sculling mercenary with Penny C as my home base. I got coached by Gunter Butter for a stretch in there of 3 years, where he taught me a lot about physiology and other special whimsical German rowing things. And then Craftsbury started its rowing program in 2012, the fall. And I was debating, after not making the 2012 Olympics, I was debating whether I should keep rowing or not. So I first answered that question by getting a dog. But then a friend told me that Craftsbury was starting up and that I'd absolutely love it and I should apply. And he was right. I applied and I got in, and it was a great fit. And I made the team the next year. So I was super thankful. And yeah, so I was the US single in 2013. I was in the US quad in 2014. And then, like, this year, I won the double at Olympic trials in 2016, but we failed to qualify it at the FOQR. That's a quick
Rundown.
way how I got in. Yeah.
So did you just love rowing like right away? I just find it amazing that you just were like, wow, this sport seems cool. Can we get some people to take us out in some boats?
Wait. Did you love rowing right away?
I feel like I really liked that it was this fun group of people. I feel like I just liked because I rowed for Wayland Weston, where I rowed in high school. It was like Wayland High School and Weston High School. So I went to school with the same like 150 kids from when I was in kindergarten. And then all of a sudden it was like new kids, right? Because it was Wayland. And I think I was definitely not that good right away, but because I was so tall, they were kind of excited about me, like maybe in a way that hadn't been true in other sports. And it was just so fun. I don't know, like novice rowing was so fun. I'm sure we were obnoxiously annoying. Like I can only imagine now having, seeing myself like how it was then. But yeah, I feel like I loved the sport of crew. Also, we called it crew in high school. I feel like I only started calling it rowing in college.
I mean, you reminded me of a few things. I left out a couple critical pieces. So the reason I was intrigued by rowing was, like, my family is not a pedigree rowing family by any means. My mom was like first generation, and her younger brother, he went to Columbia, which is one of the places where I think that's where I threw my early decision, and then I still didn't get in. But we don't have to go down that wormhole. He actually rowed all 4 years at Columbia. And when I toured Columbia, they have a wall of their boathouse with the varsity crews, etched in the wall. He was in it for 2 years. And he was actually a flatwater kayaker and almost went to the Olympics for it. But sort of like my high school coach, he did it to be in shape for kayaking. And they saw him walking around campus and they're like, you're tall and fit looking. Would you do this? And then he did it for 4 years. And I really looked up to this uncle. And so that was what put it in my head that started having me have the conversations like with my high school friends, and got really excited when one of them said, oh, my parents are members at Milwaukee Rowing Club. That's what sort of pushed it along. So my main sport in high school was actually downhill ski racing in Wisconsin, which 50% of the hills we skied on were trash dumps converted into ski hills. But what's funny is that was my priority, but I did like rowing. And what you said with the people, and I joked that it got whittled down to 5 people, those 5 people were like my closest friends in high school. And we became this group that the rest of our high school knew nothing about, but we had great times at. I even enjoy the fact that I did my first 2K one at a time as the others waited on the stairs in Gary Aarons' basement. So I enjoyed those aspects, but then it's weird. I go to college. I never once thought about quitting, never once. But I also don't know if I would say I was like loving it. I was never like a purist of like, I just love the sport. But I think the thing that I liked about it and that I got kind of addicted to was that, and I won't be the first to say it, but the harder I worked at it, the more that I got out of it. What for most of my years felt like a really linear feedback loop was something that I really appreciated, and it always felt like solid ground, and it eventually became kind of addicting in some senses. And so like in college, I brought up the downhill skiing thing because the first year I bought a season's pass to Sugarloaf like everybody does. I skied one time, and then I never bought a season pass for the remaining 4 years. And that was like my jam, but I wanted to erg more in the winter. I don't know. So yeah, I wound up really appreciating the sport. I think the thing I liked the most was just like the work I put in, I got stuff out of,
Yeah. But then deciding to keep doing it after college, not everyone makes that decision. So
How deep do you want to go?
however deep you want to go.
Well, so when you talk about people, I was fortunate that my best friend from college also wanted to do it. And to this day, I can't tell you if like I followed him or if I walked side by side with him. I definitely don't think I could say I led him because he did most of the emailing to those clubs. But so he was going to go with me, and that really helped to make it possible. I joke that I'm a jack of all trades, but I wanted to pursue something to the fullest to see how good I could get at it. I considered myself decent at everything and sort of like solid at everything, but I didn't consider myself a total outlier. And my standard might be I get A minuses on everything, but I want to get an A plus, and I wanted to go for that A plus. And I also told myself that life is going to be full of total gray areas. Like, am I a good partner or not? If I hypothetically were a father, am I a good father or not? Like all those things are going to be hard. And I wanted to pursue sport for a deeper stretch to really try to look at something that seemed black and white.
Yeah.
And sure, when I got into the thick of it in those 11 years and I'd be in some selection camps, it didn't always seem so objective, but I still appreciated the pursuit for that sake. And so that was sort of the weird thing. But, one of my minors was philosophy. So it's not like a surprise to a ton of people if I had some weird thought on why I was going to pursue rowing.
No, I mean, I get that. I feel like it's become very apparent to me that people do not put everything into things.
Yeah.
Like, this is a very unique experience that we've both gotten to have. And I think it's like incredible. I feel like you learn so much about yourself. You learn lessons that are going to go with you for the rest of your life, which is true for sports at any age, right? Like, people say that about sports. I see people all around me who maybe are high achieving or whatever, but like, they just won't push as hard as they possibly can to get as far as they possibly can, which is what you have to do if you're trying to go to the Olympics.
Yeah. People can pursue mastery or whatever you want to call it in a lot of realms.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting, and you're getting at like with sport, is like simply the competitive structure of sport, whether it feels objective or not, makes it a little bit more explicit on what you have to do to keep going and keep pushing and keep pushing. If you want to be first chair violinist, people are going to drive really hard, but it's going to feel even more qualitative than quantitative. And we have this quantitative clock in front of us, that's literally kind of driving your actions. That I think it is really, pretty unique. I still don't regret it. I want to explore more things now, despite the fact that I went from rowing to rowing to rowing. I do want to explore more things. But I think when you do this really wholehearted pursuit and you're all the way in, It's funny, you get better at dabbling. You get better at everything, later in life. You get better at dabbling. Like, I'm sure if you picked up pickleball right now, Kristi, you might be pretty good.
I have not been super great at pickleball, but I do enjoy playing. So
Okay. Okay.
maybe with more practice. I've only
Yeah.
here and there. Okay, my next question, the club life and the sort of developmental climbing the ranks life in rowing is, I would argue, very not glamorous. How did you kind of make your way through like rowing for all those different clubs? And I feel like it's like a real bootstrapping kind of life.
I feel fortunate for even the challenges that I faced, because I felt like they pushed me in the right direction. My parents would go on to be my best supporters possible. But in the first few years, they were still supportive. Like, I mean, I think they still covered my car insurance a year or two when I first graduated, and I was on the family plan for the cell phone. So, I mean, I had plenty of things. They would come and visit me. And when they visit, they cleaned a pretty foul house top to bottom. So they were wildly supportive, and yet in those first few years that I did it, I got a significant amount of pressure, because they were like, "Is this for real?" I mean, they didn't know what a 617 for 2K was at the time, but they knew I was not exactly gifted at rowing at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So they questioned it a little bit, and it came in the form of, "When are you going to get a job?" When I first moved to Philly, I worked moving jobs because I couldn't find a desk job. Then I found a job. And then I remember my dad being like, "Well, when are you going to get a job?" I'm like, "I got a job now, Dad." Like, "Get off my back. I got a job." He's like, "Well, when are you going to get a real job?" I'm like, "Oh, no, it's got to be a real job." And it was only by the fact that I survived paying my own rent, buying my own food for several years. And then they started to see this glimmer of hope. Like, I think I told them how my 2K had gotten better. But then the real interesting thing for them was when I switched to sculling. I was already coming in with that beastly 617. I was afraid of going backwards and trying something new. So I sculled only in a few situations where I was forced to, but I was apprehensive because I was like, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. I don't want to go lower. And then when I switched to sculling in that first year, by the end of it, I actually had some okay results behind me, but I'd also improved so much physiologically in those 2 years where I was resistant to it. Then my parents went all in and were wildly supportive. And when I share that to people, like, I actually greatly appreciate the slight pressure my parents put on me to make the pursuit valid. They were like, "Are you just mucking about? Is this just like prolonging something? Are you really doing this?" It made me like pull up my bootstraps and buckle down and really make sure I did it. And then within the club, I had it too. First, I was at the bottom of the totem pole. Like I said, nobody was really looking out for me. I got coaching whenever I could. And I did have some supportive presence at Penn AC, but I can remember there's usually changing of coaches. One time we had a coach, he was a volunteer. So often we would practice Saturday and Sunday because it's when he would have off of work. And I remember inquiring on behalf of my roommate, because he would go drive to DC to see his girlfriend at the time. I was like, "When is practice going to be on Sunday?" He pulled me right out of the room and accused me of being arrogant. And why was I inquiring about this? And it was because he was, I now know as a coach what it's like when people ask questions, and even if they just have that slight stern tone, and he's thinking to himself, why is this guy asking a single question here? And then in the course of maybe 8 months where I kept working at my stuff, I swear to God, in the course of 8 months, he would later be asking me what time I wanted to have practice on Sunday. He wasn't out of line or abusive, but it was challenging to me. And it was another thing that was motivating. And so some of those things like really kind of pushed me along. I also had so much to still learn from my extremely slow trajectory that I was super fortunate that for the first 4 years, I kept seeing in different places. One time it would be my erg, I saw erg improvement, but I wasn't cracking anything in the Cox pair at trials, But then I switched to sculling, and then I saw sculling improvement. So I kept looking for these kernels that might have been different while also having pressure put on me that I appreciated. And I feel like that's hard nowadays if I encounter a lot of athletes where they seem like pressure dials already turned up to 11 and it can't go any higher. Then it feels tough and unfortunate for them, because I actually felt like that pressure was really helpful towards me figuring out what I needed to do to make this possible,
Yeah. To switch over to coaching a little bit, when you decided to stop rowing yourself, did you know you wanted to go into coaching? And you coached at Colby, right? You went back and coached at Colby?
Yeah, it's a thing where I'm probably introspective with it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to do something because it's the only thing I know how to do,
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I also feel like I took a master class on rowing and got a PhD from doing it for 11 years. So I know there's many of counterpoints, like a good rower isn't necessarily a good coach. But so I do scrutinize it still. But the overly thoughtful thing that I told myself is every job that I've had has had sort of a cyclical nature. And I thought teaching and coaching is going to have a cyclical nature. But if that cycle is about trying to improve people and make them better time after time, what better thing could I do than that? That's honestly what I thought in my most romantic settings of coaching. And when I first stopped, like I knew I was done. It was a very comfortable thing. I mean, I'd started to have some growing injuries and I was pretty satisfied with some of the accomplishments that I made. And that first summer before I went to Colby, I remember Ben Davison was going to go to U23s in the single after not qualifying the quad for the Olympics. And I just remember being totally infatuated with like continuing to think about the sport and communicating it to people and like just talking about it. I mean, I was just, and now I've seen that. I've since seen that in peers and friends who have stopped their careers and gone to rowing. I mean, if you come off of rowing in the right way, like obviously if something really left a bad taste in your mouth, maybe it doesn't happen. But if you come off of rowing in a relatively positive place, man, you just can't get enough coaching out of your mouth. But now, I mean, I do evaluate it constantly because once you get into coaching, sometimes it feels that the actual part of coaching you want to do is like 20% of what you do, you know? So I constantly sort of reevaluate, how I can be better at it and why I'm doing it.
Well, that's probably what makes you a good coach. I think that you have to constantly be like growing, right? Because the sport is growing and athletes are growing. And
yeah.
Let's talk about Craftsbury.
Okay.
So you moved there in 2012, and did you just love it right away?
I did. So if you imagine 2012, I don't want to do the exact math on my age, but I was like late 20s. I was the oldest member of the team to join up. A lot of people were fresh out of college. A few things I could say is I loved it right away because one, I loved going to school in Maine and I always wanted to move back to Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine. So I immediately loved the setting. Also, that dog I said that I bought when I was debating if I was going to continue, as you know, he's a husky and he was way happier for sure. But the other big thing is it felt like the metaphor I'd use is a swimmer's drag suit. I felt as soon as I got here that my drag suit had been like I took it off and I was just in the shark skin, just flying through the water. Because in Philly, I worked the first, 5 years, I worked full time, 40-hour work weeks, and I rode before and after, and that was great. And then as I started to get better, my work got more and more flexible. And in the final Olympic year, 2011, 2012, I was working 22 hours a week to do something for them, but enough to keep my health insurance. And then I came here and we do work hours, as you know, even more came off the shelf. The expectation when I first came here was 14 hours a week when you were here. And I think 10 hours a week when you were away. And I was like, 14 hours a week, I could do that. Like, no problem. I mean, so it was both like a performance increase and happiness increase, by being here. So right away, I was pretty infatuated.
I feel like it's a pretty like magical place. I don't know. That was how I felt about it when I was there, even though it was a very brief period of time.
Well, what summer was that?
2015.
2015, yeah.
I like think about it sometimes. I remember I had just graduated from college and some other people that had also just graduated from college were trying to like make GRP. I remember John Graves was like, you should train. Like, you should move here and train. And I was just like, no.
Wait, really? You just called it magical.
But like in my mind, it was like I had a job. I thought that rowing was like done. I sort of went to Craftsbury as like a last fun hurrah. I still had U23 eligibility. Like my college coach had recommended it. And I mean, it was great. Like it was a super fun summer. I was really glad I did it. But in my mind, like what are you talking about? I couldn't come here and train here. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like
this is when now we got to just start interviewing you.
No.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty wild. Yeah.
I know. And I just think about it sometimes, like the next few years were kind of like growing pain. I don't want to say pains, but like it was definitely a sort of interesting time for GRP and especially like on the women's side. It didn't seem like a real possibility when then I was like looking for a high performance club.
Yeah, the timing didn't quite line up. There was a sort of a shift in the team composition. as we had some success with open weight men's sculling and intentionally doubled down on that. And then I think unintentionally the program wasn't as robust of a group and support for the women that we had on the team, you know.
It's just funny how like your life
Well,
paths or whatever.
yeah, I mean, if they joke about flipping the interview on you, you know, but it's like you, yeah, so you did that summer and then you're like, maybe I'm going to do this, maybe not. And then you were at Riverside, right?
Yeah.
Because your job was there and stuff. And then you're like kind of getting a taste of it. And if your competitive side's like, okay, well, I'm doing this. And then you're getting kind of both enticed, but frustrated and challenged at the same time. You know, eventually you would go on to be the founding member of Orion. It's interesting. What I kind of want to draw a parallel to is the pressure that I talked about that I felt and actually kind of kept me going when I moved to Philly. Is if somebody really wants to make it, you need to find like a reason and a system that you like double down, that you ask more of yourself and you do more. And, you know, I feel like you had that as you said, okay, I'm going to try doing this. And then you're like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I got to do this. And you
Yeah.
went through a lot of different movements to make that happen, you know?
No, definitely. And I think about it a lot, like it being the pre-Olympic year in 2015, like a lot of the people that had been at the Princeton Training Center had kind of been let go because it was the Olympic year and had ended up at Riverside, and I like coincidentally got to train with them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's a super normal experience. And then I was like, wow, I'm beating some of these people. I have a full-time job. I'm training before work and after work.
Yeah.
And these people have been training with the national team for a few years, and I am beating them at practice. And like, I'm doing this for fun. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. But if that scenario maybe hadn't played out in that way, I don't even know what would have happened.
Right. Like, say you started keeping a single at Union Boat Club.
Yeah.
You might have just missed out on like this wave that had picked you up at the right time to move you in the right way.
Well, literally, I emailed Riverside Sweeps or whatever, and I went in to talk to whoever it was, and Tom, the old Riverside coach, happened to be there and was like, no, you're going to row with us. And like, you're going to do this. And I was like, oh, I can't. I have a full-time job. And he was just like, I have a full-time job also. It's fine. We'll cook our oatmeal together like at 5 a.m. Don't worry about it.
I started to talk to Tom because I wanted some of his insights. I forgot that he was a fellow Colby Bates Bowden person, you know, D3 small school. So, you know.
He is awesome. I really enjoyed, I mean, we only worked with him for the first like 6 months-ish. I really liked working with him. Like, I thought he was super smart. And just like you're saying, like before with some of the volunteer coaches and stuff, it was amazing to me. Like, he's married, you know, he had like a whole life and was just choosing to come in and do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you say it, like something that I think about is I think a lot of times like athletes will point out the other examples or the exceptions to the rule, you know, like this is it's a hard journey to row post collegiately, but then they can point out to, oh, but so-and-so graduated and they got in the 8, like right after graduation. You know, I think 2 things to that. One, maybe they had their pressure situation earlier and you didn't see it. Like, meaning maybe they're at, 6:30 on the erg already, or, for a woman, and maybe they're already at 5:50 for a guy. And that's because of some bridge that they had to cross earlier. Just not to say that they just walked into it. Or maybe they are extremely physiologically talented right out of the box. And some people are built that way. If you're not, like, I wasn't born necessarily with a huge VO2, and if I want to do this, then you have to double down, like I was saying before, and like commit to it. But I'm just thinking that in my head as I identify with your totally different journey, but try to find like similarities or parallels.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people will point out those exceptions, and it's like, well, those exceptions have to exist and they should exist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that gives you a guiding force on what you might need,
Yeah. Kat and I have talked about it a bunch, but in 2019, when I got cut from, well, I didn't even get invited to quad camp. When I got cut from pre-quad camp, Tom Terhar was just like, you think you're special and you're not. Just be not special. Like, it's exactly what you're saying. Like, don't think, oh, this person did it their own way and wasn't that fast on the erg or was quick in the single, whatever. He was like, you have to be not special and check every box.
Yeah.
For some reason, like, I was just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because you're right. I feel like when you see people, you're like, oh, well, that person's quick in the single, but not that fast on the erg, so I could do that. Or that person did this way, so I could do that. Or that person, in reality, once you've sort of quote unquote made it, although I really hate when people say that because I feel like you're never quite making it, you sort of learn like everyone's checking every box, like
Yeah.
it's not the way it seemed from the outside. Yeah.
Okay. And then audience, okay, 2019, she's not in consideration. It's a problem. Then we get this cool pandemic that strikes, but all along, she gets 2-year training montage, comes
Mm-hmm.
back in 2021, and I'm like, who this? You know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, I think the pandemic really, I mean, not only me, I think there's a lot of people that like having that time to develop in sort of a more unstructured way was like really helpful.
Yeah.
So then coming back to Craftsbury as a coach, what has that been like?
Yeah. That's the other thing. It's parallel I draw with coaching is I don't know what to make of it, but I draw it. Um, is people say with acting, it's like TV and cinema. If you do one, as soon as you go to TV, can you actually go back to cinema and stuff like that? Well, I don't know where Craftsbury is in that equation, but post collegiate coaching is sort of this own interesting realm that requires a lot of work and is relatively thankless in some ways relative to a collegiate season, which has these enforced periodizations because of breaks and summers and stuff like that. And then there's championships, as soon as you row post collegiately, it's like the ultimate demonstration of delayed gratification. And we don't even know when we'll ever give it to ourselves, really. It was great to come back. I felt like I really had a blank slate, when I came back, even though it existed. The team had been shepherded by a few people in the interim, but it hadn't had like a head coach for almost like 2 years at
Mm-hmm.
that point. And now I look at it humbly, the stuff I did when I first came in. I wanted us to have not just for the rowing portion, because there's Nordic skiing and biathlon and now there's running as well. But I wanted us to have like team principles and team values. And we, with some of the athletes at the time and some of the other coaches, we really workshopped that. And I felt really good about putting that into work. And I was still able to come in pretty hot and enthusiastic. And I still earnestly want to keep improving and adapting stuff, as you sort of talked about before. Every year I'm able to bring in some great U23 assistant coaches, and I think they're shocked at what it feels like to coach a small boat program in a post-collegiate setting where you have more than one structured practice that you run a day. Power to them, because then they have to go back and reset and do their collegiate thing. But I'm like, hey guys, this is just a Tuesday. And so I've gotten really good at surviving it, but it's been challenging. At times pretty fatigued, if I'm totally transparent, because like there really is no break. And I'm trying to find ways that I build in appropriate breaks for me and communicate to athletes why that's like essential and why it's necessary. But, the hardest thing will be I could have some people ending their racing at the start of August with, say, Canadian Henley, or I've had people stop after, say, the last trials in June or July, and they might be done. But then I could have people that are going to the World Championships and they're not done till October, essentially. And it's like, well, where am I, in that?
Yeah. I feel like for us, the sort of balance, I think it's been great, like US rowing wanting athletes to be able to train at high performance clubs and like come into the system and all this stuff. But I think it has been a challenge, like sort of what you were just saying. You have all these athletes on different quote unquote like paths and plans, and how do you keep a cohesive team, right? Like with those values that you've set up, and as you as a central coach, like I feel like for us that's been pretty challenging.
Yeah, it's really challenging. And I guess before I get into like the nitty gritty of maybe what it's like right now for the US system, when I was post collegiately rowing, I didn't love being selfish, but I was totally conscious that it was a selfish pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way around it. And I thought it to myself as an athlete, and I've said it as a coach. This is a selfish pursuit, and we're not curing world hunger or cancer. We're not doing anything like that. But hopefully, if we go back to the thing we talked about earlier, hopefully, if you really work at this, mastery and really trying to be good at one thing, what you bring to the world when you're done with this might just change it. Again, that would be the most romantic tagline I come up with. But as we do that, it's different than college. Even if college you're fulfilling a personal passion, it's a team locomotive that's just like trucking. I find it really interesting post-collegiately, how do you identify with the team? Because everybody's journey is even more independent. And it's like literally there might become a time where you and a teammate are battling it out for the same seat. So, I embodied that. I can look at times in hindsight, I don't think I ever was that bad. But when I think about me being the oldest person at like 28 or something when I moved here, how I could have been more understanding of the 22-year-old that just showed up, but I was like, I know what I need. Get out of my way. And then it's funny. The moment that I stopped, I never appreciated CrossFit when I was like a rowing athlete because I thought it was like bad physiological training and this and that. I loved CrossFit the moment I stopped. I didn't realize, even as sort of a lone wolf, single sculler pursuing post collegiate rowing, I didn't realize how much I still needed a team and wanted a team. And like showing up to a CrossFit community to do a workout filled a huge void. And I really appreciated it. So push comes to shove, I think is this really interesting thing. We do need to have a team now. It's more handy, even if you're the lonest of lone wolves, you probably appreciate it more than you know. But it's an incredibly challenging and nuanced way to set it up just with the idea of a post-collegiate pursuit, let alone the logistical and practical stuff in the US rowing stuff. Yeah, I think that it's a whole nother layer. Like the comings and goings, I really want to be able to be a turnstile for those people that are making it,
Yeah.
so that they can come back here whenever they want and find something that still adds value and hopefully adds recovery, but also adds speed. Like I don't want to just be a recovery dump.
Yeah.
That's really tricky to do. And when we first started getting a national team training plan, to be honest, I was really glad because it forced buy-in from people, which over time and through the pandemic, the obligated buy-in that everyone had to have to a national team plan if they wanted to go for the national team. But that being said, I also think I know now when I take in a new member, it's not necessarily like the plan that they should do to
Yeah.
start off. And so now I'm trying to get into the weeds of finding what plan is right for which person. If we have like a good and mature understanding of this person's doing this for this reason and this person's doing that for that reason. So it's tough.
Yeah. But you guys, I don't know, you got to feel pretty like proud of the team. I feel like a lot of people moving on for the season. I don't know.
I've talked with Kat at Orion, your
My
coach.
coach.
Yeah, just for the listeners. In a team of about a dozen people, we've had sweepers, scullers, men, women, and we
Lightweights.
have a token lightweight. My goal of what Craftsbury would be like is to function like a high achieving team in a small country. I can think of like Lithuania, Slovenia, Croatia. They have people they put on the podium and they don't have the long line of athletes that we have. So I'd love to be able to do that. South Africa is like another one that I've always wanted to kind of model off of and appreciate. But that being said, I've talked to Kat at times, like where when you're spread across all those disciplines, I think you have to be a certain type of person and a certain type of athlete. And I as a coach, need to show it in a certain way to still make it as functional as having a homogenous training group. It's hard to rival a program that has depth in one discipline and gender because those competitive standards just become way more transparent. I do feel good about our like humble achievements, and still hope for more if it works for the US system and works for what our mission and goals are. A hard part that I guess I didn't touch on is like we're doing selection for 5 years now. We've had races in February. Most years you'd have a race in April and a race in May. And obviously things are frozen up here. So with the race in April, it just meant that we went away like in March and then we could do the race in April and then we could come back up here. But with a race in February and a race in April, it means essentially that we're gone from January through April. And that's what I just did. And I've done it for 5 years straight, where it used to happen once every 4 years in the
In the
Olympic year.
Olympic year. Yeah.
And that's been something that's like been stressful on myself personally because I'm,
Yeah.
trying to have a home, trying to have a relationship, and I want to coach here because I love being here. And if I'm not here, that makes it pretty tough. And then it's also tough on the GRP, the team that I coach. The athletes see it in that like they're on the road and they don't necessarily love living out of a suitcase, but the GRP is like an entity outside of them. It was really meant to be something that was part of this community.
Yeah.
And we've been outside of the community for a lot. And so that's like pretty big challenges that we don't exactly know how we'll broach them like in the future, and how we can find a better way to like both work with the US rowing system that also works for what we want to be.
No, I think we're having very, very similar growing pains. I think maybe they could be called.
Hey,
Like,
you're a regatta director. And
I know I'm like a full or part-time employee, like at
yeah,
Saratoga. I mean, I find it, I felt so connected to the Saratoga community, like not just the rowing community, but the whole community, like really, really involved. And I feel like me racing in the last Olympics, it was such a community thing. And that felt really cool and special. And like so many people in the organization. And now, because of what you said, I'm on the road half the year, if not more. This year, it will literally be more than half the year. And it's just hard to feel connected to a place you're not in.
yeah. As a now middle-aged man, it's hard to realize that like I don't have a friend that I can call locally
Yeah.
because I'm just like gone too much.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. I don't know what the solutions are.
Yeah, I don't know yet either. Yeah, we're working on it, thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing for both programs, because I think both programs were built a little differently. But obviously at Orion, they're a critical part of like the coaching staff.
Yeah.
And here we used to be the super helping hands in the winter time,
Yeah.
until we went away.
Yeah. The community involvement is like, I think, very similar between the
Yeah.
two places. Well, to end with maybe a more uplifting question.
Yeah.
I am curious, like you mentioned, you have to take some personal time, which I think is like very valid. Do you have any like fun things that you like to do for what Ian calls self-care?
Um,
Or fun
well,
plans for the end of the season?
all right, I'm trying to get upbeat. But the other thing that happened, we just had a solar eclipse totality
Mm-hmm.
right here in my home turf. I could have sat in a field that I own and watched it, but I missed it by a day, and there's nothing I could do about it. So I don't have an immediate plan, but now I think I'm going to be like a solar eclipse chaser, where I need to make it up to
Oh,
myself, and it'll never be here at my home, but I'd like to go to the next like solar eclipse at some point. But yeah, so that's something I'd like to do, but that's not happening in the end of the summer. It will be a nice thing, but the thing that's consumed all the rest of my time is I've been building a house up here. I honestly think when I get a moment, it'll just be like literally being able to sit outside at that house and, watch the sunset, with a cold drink in my hand in the summer will feel like it's worth its weight in gold.
yeah.
Like I've had places I've identified with, but that'll truly be like a home. So I think that'll be the real treat, but that's also been its own stress through this whole process.
Yeah. Do you listen to the Daily? It's like the
Sometimes, but not daily.
Oh, well, they did one about this solar eclipse chaser, like the day of the solar eclipse.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. He was funny.
I met some in my travels as I came back at a
Oh,
gas station. And then there's somebody from the rowing community who was staying here at Craftsbury, came up just to watch it and was still here a day later. And I got to see his photos and stuff like that. So that was cool. And he's
yeah.
been a chaser. So
I was bummed that I missed it as well, but I was not as close as you were. So
I tried to ask Zimmer if we could somehow end Olympic trials a day or two earlier. And I think he was shocked to hear that it was for the sake of an eclipse. But,
I feel like they've changed the schedule for less important things. So
probably. Yeah.
before we wrap up, is there anything I didn't ask you about or you didn't talk about that you want to mention?
I mean, you did have interesting talk about me wearing multiple hats now and like how I do that.
Oh, yeah.
Like part of why I think I'm on the high performance committee is not so much because of who I am, or maybe it's more because of who I'm not. People could take that for whatever they want it to be. I mean, the reason I said yes to that was just another way that I can try to like help the community and help build it forward. And then the times that I've been involved in selection, I like to have levity and, be goofy at times. But in terms of being fair,
Mm-hmm.
equitable, I feel like that type of professionalism, like it's very clear to me to like look at something and, both come to decisions, question my own decisions and scrutinize them to make sure that they're coming from the right place. It's been manageable, but at times I am behind on typing up my minutes for the high performance committee. So I apologize to the U.S. rowing community for that.
I think that's okay.
But I'm trying to get better daily.
Well, do you have any questions for me before we wrap it up?
I mean, so the audience knows I've been asking you questions whenever I can. I did ask, I was still so intrigued. And now talking about it as a 2-year period of 2019 to 2021, part of what I think I've realized in my own journey and I've described to people, you're always you. So if somebody comes up to you and they're like, wow, how'd you do this?
Yeah.
You're like, I just did me. It was the same thing I was doing all along. Like when I described that coach where he went from asking if I was arrogant to asking me what time I wanted practice, he's felt a meteoric change in me. I was just like, man, I was clocking in, clocking out every day.
Yeah.
So I remember me asking you that. And now that I think about it, this 2-year window, and now that you give me that like note of what Tom said to you, it starts making more and more sense. Like you had a pretty linear improvement through that time. The catch was there were 2 years where we didn't get to see the continued improvement,
Yeah. And I also feel like in that time, I think there were decisions made, obviously, by people within U.S. rowing or maybe slightly on the outside of U.S. rowing that there weren't a lot of doors open during the pandemic, right? Because like groups had to be so small. And I just constantly felt like I was being overlooked by a variety of people. And that frustrated me. Like a moment that comes to mind is that they held this COVID Cup in Boston and it seemed like invited everyone and didn't invite us. And I was like,
wait, really? You guys weren't invited to that?
No.
Oh.
I was like, all right, I guess I'll do some super hard workout this day. Like you guys are doing 2K. I'm going to ride my bike 50 miles and do 2x6K. Like I feel like I think a little bit of my like craziness that I've tried to hold on to like since then sort of came during the pandemic when, I mean, I give so much credit to Kat as well. Like he did a great job making things fun and different. I think he saw the opportunity for what it was. And while I literally gravely detest this triathlon that we had to do, and I like yelled at him in the midst of doing it, I think stuff like that, was actually probably good for us.
Well, so that makes me think of another question for you, because I see it as a real strength that your group has a lot of people that like to bike now. It's not just coming in as cross training in an alternative to rowing. It's coming in as like an addition to rowing. Easy example is like everybody doing like Sunday bike rides where it's like, well, you could have off or you could bike for 3 hours.
Yeah.
When did that come about and how? Because I feel like you were probably on the ground floor of more cycling happening.
So the way that I met Kat was through this rowing and biking camp when I was in high school called Row Ride Race, where we rode in the mornings, rode bicycles in the afternoon, and then the like end of it was that we rode our bicycles from Saratoga to St. Catharines for Canadian Henley and then raced the week of Canadian Henley. So we did a 5-day ride with like whatever 70 miles per day, 80 miles
Holy
per day.
cow.
Yeah.
And you were in high school?
I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school. And we got in a lot of bike crashes. And I said at the end of it, I am never getting on a bike again. Like, this was horrible. It was not fun. And Kat was like, in 10 years, I think you'll feel differently about all of this. And what's like a bit ironic is it wasn't quite 10 years, but it was almost 10 years. Like the pandemic was after that. It was not me originally. It was actually some other members of Orion and like people in our community were riding bikes. And I didn't live at the training center. I had moved in with now my ex-boyfriend. And so the restrictions for me were even more like I could not go into the boathouse to work out. My options were rowing my single or running because wasn't biking. So I was like, well, I'm getting a little tired of these two things. Might as well try cycling. So I asked one of the masters rowers if I could borrow her bike, rode that for a little while, and then just bought like a super cheapo Giant from some guy, which was a great bike. I loved that bike. And then we started riding and then we just started doing these crazy long Sunday rides and it just sort of elevated from there. So it was never part of the training plan. It was always voluntary. And then he started putting it on the training plan and I actually got a little bit mad at him because I didn't want other people to like, be in my like secret thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It hasn't been that way at all. And I do still think a lot of it is voluntary.
Yeah.
But the other thing is like in Saratoga, it's awesome to ride your bike and going for a 50-mile ride on or a 30-mile, whatever, on a Sunday is like a really awesome experience. In Sarasota, Florida, it stinks. Like there's just not great places to ride. It's not the same. And so that's like a, another thing of not being home. But yeah, I mean, I literally have 2 bicycles in my room right there. So it clearly has lasted.
Back on the wagon.
But Kat was right, which is just, every time he's right, it just sort of pains me.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So thanks so much to Steve for coming on and sharing so much. I hope everyone really enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. To leave you this week, I'm sharing a quote from Babe Ruth, which I thought was appropriate because baseball season has begun and Babe Ruth is baseball, or was, or whatever. So anyways, he said, "Every strike brings me closer to the next home run." So hope you enjoy that and have a great week. See you next time. Bye. I'd love to hear from you. So send us a topic suggestion, or if you'd like to submit a question for our Ask Kristi Anything segment, head to our website, theother3years.com.